Get out of my OR. Dr. Lawrence Wright didn't lower his voice. He didn't even look up from his chart. Every nurse in that hallway heard it. Every resident froze. Mia Chen stood in the doorway with a medication tray in her hands, her knuckles white, her face absolutely still. I said, get out. You don't belong in a surgical suite. You belong at a reception desk handing out visitor badges. Someone laughed. One of the junior residents. Mia set the tray down on the counter with a sound so quiet it was almost polite, turned and walked away. Nobody stopped her. Nobody said a word. And nobody, not one person in that hallway knew that the woman they just watched walk away had once kept 3 soldiers alive in a ditch in Kandahar with nothing but a field kit and 12 minutes on the clock. If this story hits you somewhere deep, subscribe to this channel right now and follow Mia's story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. It started with a text message. That was the part nobody ever believed later when the whole thing came out. It started with something as small and stupid and human as a text message sent to the wrong number at 11:43 on a Tuesday night. Mia had been working a double shift. 14 hours on her feet, most of them in the East Wing, where the fluorescent lights flickered every 20 minutes, like the building itself was having a slow breakdown. She'd changed 3 wound dressings, monitored 2 post-op patients, restocked the crash cart, after Dr. Felicity Odom's team used half of it on a trauma case that came in from the highway, and spent 40 minutes in the break room pretending to eat a sandwich while actually staring at her phone and waiting for Marcus to call. Marcus hadn't called. Marcus had texted. 3 words. I need space. That was it. No punctuation. No follow-up. Just 3 words sitting on her screen like a small, ugly fact. She typed her response fast, the way you do when the anger and the hurt arrive at exactly the same time, and your fingers just go, fine, we're done, don't contact me again. She hit send before she even finished reading it back. The number she'd sent it to was not Marcus's number. She didn't realize it for almost 4 minutes. She was walking back toward the East Wing, her phone in her pocket, her mind already shutting Marcus out the way she'd learned to shut things out clean, fast, no residue when the reply came. And the reply was not from Marcus. She stopped in the middle of the hallway and read it. Come over, 2 words, nothing else. No name, no explanation, no context, just an instruction stated with the kind of flat certainty that belonged to someone who had never once in their life said please and expected to need to. Mia stared at it. She looked at the number. She looked at it again. She'd typed 1 digit wrong in Marcus's contact, a 6 instead of an 8. And somehow that single transposition had landed her breakup message in the inbox of a stranger who apparently interpreted, "We're done, don't contact me again," as an invitation. She typed back, "Wrong number. Sorry." The response came in under 30 seconds. "I know." She stopped walking. She typed, "Excuse me?" The response, "You texted the wrong number." "I'm aware. Come over anyway." Mia stood in the hallway of St. Catherine's Hospital at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, exhausted, down to her back molars freshly broken up, with wearing scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, and she read that message 3 times. Then she typed, "Who is this?" No response for 2 full minutes. She was almost relieved. A glitch, a drunk person, someone's idea of a joke. She'd blocked the number and moved on with her life. She was actually reaching for the block button when the next message arrived. It wasn't a name, it was a photo, a business card. Clean, heavy stock, the kind that costs more per card than most people spend on lunch. Embossed letters, black on cream, Daniel Rourke, Chairman, Rourke Capital Group. Mia blinked at her phone. Rourke Capital Group. She knew that name. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. Daniel Rourke was the kind of man whose photograph appeared in the Tribune, not because he sought coverage, but because reporters camped outside his building hoping to catch 15 seconds of him walking to a car. 44 years old, self-made, which in his case meant he'd turned a failing Midwest manufacturing company into a private equity firm worth $11 billion in under a decade. He sat on 3 federal advisory boards, owned a building 2 blocks from Millennium Park, and had never, to anyone's knowledge, sent a text message that began with anything other than a direct command. She typed, "This isn't funny." He typed back, "I'm not laughing." She typed, "I don't know you." He typed, "You will." She should have blocked him right then. She knew that. Later, much later, she would think about that moment, the clean simplicity of the block button, sitting right there, and understand exactly why she hadn't used it. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't attraction. It was something more specific and harder to name. It was the recognition of a particular tone. She'd heard that tone before. In briefing rooms, from people who knew exactly what was about to happen and were calmly waiting for everyone else to catch up. She typed, "I'm a nurse. I'm at work. Please don't text this number again." He typed, "What ward?" She didn't answer that. She put her phone in her pocket and went back to work. The East Wing at that hour was quieter than the ER, but never actually quiet. There was always something, a call light, a monitor alarm, the low-grade ambient tension of a building full of people whose bodies were fighting something. Mia moved through it the way she always did, which was efficiently and without fuss, checking in on her patients with the calm that her colleagues sometimes mistook for detachment and was actually something much more controlled than that. Room 412 was a post-op gallbladder, recovering while sleeping. Room 414 was a 73-year-old man named Gerald who had a hip replacement 2 days ago and spent his nights trying to argue his way out of bed, convinced he needed to water his tomatoes. Mia talked him back into his pillow with a particular mix of firmness and warmth that she'd developed over 14 months at St. Catherine's, and before that in places where firmness was the only currency that worked. She was in the hallway outside Gerald's room when her charge nurse, Patricia Lowe, came around the corner with the look on her face that meant something was happening. "ER just called up," Patricia said. "They're bringing in a high-value security detail, the whole thing. Political Senator James Harrison." Mia felt her attention sharpen, not the surface sharpening of interest, something deeper. The specific involuntary recalibration that happened in the back of her mind whenever the word senator appeared in a medical context, because in her experience, the word senator in a medical context was rarely just medical. "What's the presentation?" she asked. "Cardiac event, they think. Came in from a fundraising dinner. His detail says he was fine at 9, collapsed at 11:15. Patricia paused. "Dr. Wright's already down there." Mia said nothing to that. She finished her notation on Gerald's chart, handed it back, and clocked the time. 11:52. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, still at the hospital. She stopped in the middle of the hallway. She looked at the number. She had not blocked it. She had meant to block it, and she had not done it, and she wasn't entirely sure why. She typed, "How do you know I'm at the hospital?" He typed, "You said you were at work. Your scrubs are St. Catherine's blue. I can see the color calibration on the photo metadata. You sent an image earlier in the conversation." She looked back through the thread. She had not sent an image. She was almost certain she had not sent an image. Then she scrolled up and found it when she'd meant to send Marcus a photo of her meal as a joke 3 weeks ago. She'd apparently sent it to this number by accident, along with a cascade of other misdirected messages she'd never noticed. The thread went back 6 weeks. She'd been accidentally texting Daniel Rourke for 6 weeks. She scrolled through it with a feeling she couldn't quite name. He had never responded to any of the earlier messages. He had apparently received 6 weeks of accidental updates about her work schedule, a complaint about the hospital vending machine, 2 photos of food, and 1 voice memo that she'd sent by mistake. That was just her humming in the car. He had never said a word until tonight. She typed, "You read all of those and never said anything." He typed, "I was waiting for the right moment." She typed, "That's deeply strange." He typed, "Probably." She typed, "I have to go. There's a patient." He typed, "Harrison." She stopped breathing for half a second. She looked at her phone. She typed, "What did you just say?" He didn't answer. 3 minutes of silence. Then, "Go do your job. We'll talk later." She stood in the hallway of St. Catherine's Hospital and felt the particular sensation of 2 completely separate situations colliding in a way that made no sense yet and would eventually make all the sense in the world. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went toward the elevator. The ER was running at capacity. She could hear it before the elevator doors opened. The radio traffic, the rolling equipment, the specific frequency of professional urgency that had a different sound than panic. This wasn't panic. The team down here knew what they were doing, but they were working hard. She wasn't assigned to the ER. She had no reason to be there. She went anyway. Senator Harrison was in Bay 3, surrounded by enough people that she couldn't see him, but she could read the monitors from 6 feet out, and what they told her was not good. Heart rate irregular, blood pressure dropping in a pattern that wasn't right for a cardiac event. Not the drop you saw with an MR, not the flatline you braced for. Something slower, something systemic. Dr. Wright was at the center of it, which meant the room had a particular energy because Wright commanded every room he walked into the way a magnet commands iron filings. He was brilliant. Mia had never questioned that. He was also the most comprehensively dismissive physician she had ever worked under, and she had worked under people who considered human life a logistical problem. Let's talk about the presentation, Wright said to no one and everyone. Cardiac event, possible arrhythmia. What are we missing? Blood pressure patterns unusual, said one of the residents, a young man named Cho, who Mia had always thought was sharp. It's dropping too evenly. Cardiac events are messier. Evenly. Wright repeated it the way he repeated things he found unimpressive. Evenly. What does that tell you, Dr. Cho? I don't know yet. No, you don't. Wright moved to the monitor, studied it, and said, push fluids. Let's get a full panel and a cardiology consult. Mia was standing just inside the door. She wasn't supposed to be there. She looked at the senator's color gray and wrong, and she looked at the monitors, and she looked at the very faint tremor in the man's left hand, barely visible, a small persistent vibration that hadn't shown up in the primary chart notes because nobody had been close enough to see it. She'd seen that tremor before, not in a hospital, in a tent in the Korengal Valley on a 26-year-old infantryman who'd been exposed to a locally synthesized organophosphate compound in a village water source and had 11 minutes to live when she found him. She stepped forward. Dr. Wright? He turned around. His expression was the one she expected. Why are you in my ER? The tremor in his left hand, she said. It's vesicular. That's not cardiac. Silence. The particular weighted silence of a room full of people deciding whether to pay attention. I'm sorry, Wright said, and the way he said it made clear he was not. Vesicular tremor combined with that blood pressure pattern in the timeline from onset 90 minutes from exposure to presentation, I think this is organophosphate poisoning, possibly a nerve agent derivative. For a moment, the room was so quiet she could hear Senator Harrison's monitor beeping. Then Wright smiled. It was the smile he used when he wanted to make something small. Organophosphate poisoning at a fundraiser. Yes. You're a floor nurse. I'm a nurse, yes. With exactly what credentials that make you think you can walk into my ER and contradict a working diagnosis? The tremor, she said again. And his pupils, they're constricted. That's not cardiac, that's cholinergic toxidrome. Wright stared at her. Get her out of here, he said to no one in particular, then to Mia. If you come back down here without a direct assignment, I will have your badge by morning. Do you understand me? She understood him. She understood him completely. She walked out of Bay 3, stood in the hallway for approximately 4 seconds, and made a decision. She pulled out her phone, not to call anyone, not to send a message. She stood in the hallway and she thought about the infantryman in the Korengal Valley. And she thought about the 11 minutes, and she thought about the fact that the senator's blood pressure curve, if she was right, gave him approximately 37 minutes before his respiratory function began to deteriorate beyond the point of clean reversal. Her phone buzzed. Are you still in the building? She looked at the message from Daniel Rourke, and she thought about what he had said when she told him there was a patient. Harrison, just like that. The name of the senator. With no other context, she typed, How do you know Senator Harrison is here? He typed, His chief of staff called me 20 minutes ago. She typed, Why would his chief of staff call you? He typed, Because Harrison and I have a meeting scheduled for Thursday that impacts $300 million in a federal infrastructure contract, and the chief of staff wanted me to know the meeting might need to be rescheduled. Why? She stared at her phone. Then she typed, What did Harrison eat tonight at the fundraiser? A pause, then, Why are you asking me that? She typed, Because I need to know. Another pause. Longer, then catered to dinner. Beef tenderloin truffle risotto, the usual. He mentioned to his aide that the water tasted off. His aide thought he was being fussy. Is there something wrong with the diagnosis down there? She typed, Yes. He typed, What do you need? She looked up from her phone. She looked at the closed door of Bay 3. She thought about her badge, and she thought about Wright's voice saying, Get her out. And she thought about the infantryman's name, which was Corporal David Reyes, age 26, from Tucson, Arizona, who had 3 sisters and a dog named Pete. and who had been alive when she walked away from that tent because she had not waited for permission. She typed, "I need atropine and pralidoxim, chloride, and I need someone with enough authority to override a chief of surgery." 3 seconds passed. Then, "On which of those do you need help?" She typed, "Should the second one." He typed, "Give me 4 minutes." She walked back toward the elevator. She didn't go up. She went to the supply room on the ER level, used her badge to get through the door, and stood in the controlled quiet of the medication storage alcove. She knew where everything was. She'd rotated through the ER for 2 weeks in her third month at St. Catherine's, and she had the kind of memory that filed spatial information, automatically and permanently, a habit from years of working in environments where not knowing where things were could kill someone. She pulled the atropine from the locked drawer using her floor credentials, which should not have given her access to ER-controlled substances, but did, because the pharmacy IT system had a crossover error that nobody had gotten around to fixing. She had noticed it 8 months ago and had said nothing because she thought there might be a day when it would matter. She was standing at the medication cart drawing the correct dose by weight. She had looked at Harrison's intake chart on the monitor in Bay 3, 187 pounds. She'd done the calculation in her head in approximately 3 seconds when the door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. She kept her hands steady and finished drawing the dose. Mia Chen. The voice was not Wright's. It was a voice she had never heard before in this building, which meant it was new, which meant it was connected to the phone call, which meant she had approximately 45 seconds to finish what she was doing before this became a conversation. "1 moment," she said. "Take your time." She capped the syringe. She turned around. He was leaner than the photographs in the Tribune had suggested. Photographs flattened people. In person, Daniel Rourke had the kind of physical presence that came from a decade of controlled discipline, the kind of body that belonged to a person who treated their own maintenance the way they treated everything else efficiently, seriously, without sentiment. He was in a suit that cost more than her monthly rent. He was looking at her the way very few people looked at her, which was directly and without any particular agenda other than assessment. "You came here," she said. "You asked for someone with authority." "I meant a phone call. A phone call takes longer." He looked at the syringe in her hand. "Is that what I think it is?" "Atropine, first dose. I'll need to follow with pralidoxim in about 20 minutes depending on his response." "And you're certain?" "Yes." He studied her face for a moment, not doubting her, something else. "What's your name, your full name?" "Mia Chen." "How long have you been a nurse?" 14 months here." And before that, she held the syringe and she looked at him and she understood in the specific way that she understood things that were about to become complicated, that the answer to that question was going to matter more than she wanted it to. Before that, she said, "I was Captain Mia Chen, United States Army, 68th Medical Brigade, 2 tours." He didn't blink. "Kandahar and Mosul. And you think the senator has been deliberately poisoned?" She said, "I don't think. I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone and made a call. "One ring. It's Rourke. I need Dr. Vaughn in Bay 3 in 2 minutes." "Yes, now. Tell Wright he's been superseded on this case. Tell him Dr. Vaughn is the hospital board's attending of record." A pause. "Because I own 40% of this hospital's capital foundation, and I have a standing governance provision that lets me do exactly this." "Thank you." He hung up. He looked at Mia. "You have 2 minutes before Vaughn gets there and creates a window. Can you administer in that time?" "Yes," she said. "Then let's go." She walked out of the supply room with Daniel Rourke 1 step behind her and the atropine in her hand and 31 minutes left on her internal clock, and the hallway outside Bay 3 felt like every hallway she had ever moved down fast with something irreversible in her hands, and she did not think about Wright or her badge or what was going to happen tomorrow. She thought only about the dose, the vein, the weight, the clock. The way she'd been trained to think, the way apparently she had never stopped thinking even when she spent a year pretending to be someone ordinary. Bay 3 was exactly as she'd left it, except that the senator's color had moved from gray to something worse, and the monitor was showing what she'd expected it to show, and nobody in that room had gotten any closer to understanding why. Wright turned around when she walked in. He opened his mouth. "Dr. Vaughn has assumed attending responsibility for this case," she said, which was not something she had ever said to a chief of surgery before, and probably would not have worked on any other night, but Daniel Rourke was already on the phone again behind her, and something in Wright's expression shifted from fury to a calculation that lasted approximately 2 seconds before he stepped back. She moved to the senator's side. She found the line. She administered the first dose with hands that did not shake, had never shaken, would not shake, because shaking was something that happened to people who were unsure, and she was not unsure. Then she looked up and met the senator's eyes, which were open barely, and said, "Senator Harrison, my name is Mia Chen. I'm a nurse at St. Catherine's. I need you to stay still and keep breathing. You're going to be okay." His lips moved. She leaned down to hear it. "My water," he said, "at dinner. Someone—" "I know," she said. "I know." She straightened up. She looked at the monitor. She watched the numbers. In the doorway, Dr. Lawrence Wright was watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something that had no professional name, something that was just a man looking at a fact he hadn't previously believed existed. Nobody spoke. The monitor beeped. The heart rate steadied. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just steadied incrementally, the way real bodies responded to real medicine when the right person got there in time. Behind her, she heard Daniel Rourke end his phone call. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the monitor, and she counted silently the way she always counted, and she waited for the numbers to tell her she had been right. They told her. Clean and definitive and absolutely without mercy toward everyone in that room who had told her to leave. She had been right. She was always right about this. And now everyone in Bay 3 knew it, and that knowledge sat in the room like something that had been waiting a long time to be let in. The numbers didn't lie. That was the thing about monitors. They had no loyalty, no politics, no investment in who was right and who was wrong. They just reported what the body was doing and what Senator Harrison's body was doing 11 minutes after Mia administered the first atropine dose was stabilizing. Not dramatically. Not the kind of recovery that made people gasp. Just the quiet, incremental return of function, a heart finding its rhythm again, a blood pressure curve bending back toward survivable. Real medicine looked like math, and the math was working. Nobody in Bay 3 said anything for a long moment. The monitor beeped. A resident cleared his throat. Dr. Cho, the sharp one, was staring at the numbers with an expression that mixed relief with the particular humiliation of realizing you had been standing next to the right answer for 20 minutes and hadn't seen it. Wright was the first to speak. "What did you give him, atropine?" Mia said. 2 milligrams calculated by weight. I'll need to follow with pralidoxim in 15 minutes. I'll also need a full organophosphate panel on his blood draw. The results will confirm what you're seeing on the monitor right now. You pulled controlled substances from my ER supply room. Yes. Without authorization. Dr. Vaughn has attending authority on this case, she said. You can take it up with the board. Wright's jaw tightened. He looked at Rourke, who was standing near the door with his phone in his hand, and the expression of a man who had already moved 3 steps past this moment and was waiting for everyone else to arrive. Wright looked back at Mia, and what happened next was the thing she would remember longest, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so small, and small things from men like Wright always cost something. He walked out. No apology, no acknowledgement. He picked up his chart, tucked it under his arm, and walked out of Bay 3 as if he were simply choosing to be somewhere else, and the door swung shut behind him, and that was that. One of the nurses let out a breath, just a small one. Mia turned back to the senator. Harrison's eyes were clearer now. Not fully, he was still compromised, still moving through the thick biological fog that organophosphate exposure left in its wake, but clear enough to track her face, clear enough for her to see that he was actively trying to understand what had just happened to him. You're going to feel confused for a while, she said quietly, close enough that she didn't need to project. That's the toxin clearing. It's going to feel strange before it feels better. That's normal. What was it? He asked. His voice was rough, stripped down. We don't have confirmation yet, but based on your presentation and your response to treatment, I believe you were exposed to an organophosphate compound, a nerve agent derivative. He stared at her. Someone poisoned me. That's the direction this is heading. Yes. The water, he said. At the dinner. I told Marcus, I told my aide, the water tasted off. He thought I was... He stopped. His hand moved involuntarily, the faint residual tremor still present in his fingers. He looked at it like it belonged to someone else. I've had people try to embarrass me, derail a vote, leak a document. Nobody has ever. He stopped again. Senator. She kept her voice level and steady the way she'd learned to keep it when talking to people whose nervous systems were only partially back online. Right now, the only job you have is to keep breathing and let the medication work. Everything else is going to keep. He looked at her for a long moment. Who are you, but I'm in? Mia Chen, I'm a nurse here. You don't sound like a nurse. I get that a lot, she said. Behind her, Rourke had moved away from the door and was speaking quietly to someone on his phone. She caught fragments. Federal notification, investigation protocol. Yes, tonight. She filed it away and focused on Harrison's second dose, drawing the praladoxim with the same mechanical precision, the calculation already done in her head. The door opened. Two men in suits walked in, and they moved the way Mia had seen certain people move in certain buildings, not rushing, but with a purposeful efficiency that cleared space without asking for it. One of them had a federal badge clipped to his belt. The other one's jacket fit wrong around the shoulder, which meant he was carrying. The first one looked at her. Who is the treating physician? Dr. Vaughn has attending authority, she said. I'm the treating nurse. And you are Mia Chen. He looked at her badge. He looked at the syringe in her hand. He looked at the monitor. He processed all of this in about 3 seconds. You administered the intervention. Yes. What's your background? She paused just briefly enough that Rourke from across the room glanced over. Registered Nurse Street, Catherine's, 14 months. Before that, she looked at the federal badge. She looked at the man's face. She said, I think you probably already know the answer to that. He nodded slowly. We'll need to speak with you when the senator is stable. I know, she said. She administered the second dose. The monitor held steady. The residents in the room gradually resumed breathing at a normal rate. Someone went to find Dr. Vaughn. The two federal agents positioned themselves near the door in that particular way that meant they weren't leaving and weren't announcing it. Rourke appeared at her elbow. Not intrusively, he had the spatial awareness of someone who'd spent a long time in rooms where misreading physical proximity had consequences. He stood close enough to speak quietly without being heard. Are you all right? He asked. I'm fine. You don't look fine. I look exactly like someone who just ran 2 miles of a sprint that nobody was supposed to see. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the monitor. Why are federal agents here already? I called it in when you told me he'd been poisoned. I have a direct line to which agency? A pause. More than one. She turned and looked at him then. He met her eyes without flinching, which she respected, and without explaining himself further, which she also respected for the less comfortable reason that it meant he was someone who understood exactly how much information to give and when to stop. You've done this before, she said, not a question. Not this exactly, but adjacently. He said nothing, which was its own answer. She looked back at the senator. He said someone poisoned him. He said it like a man who was surprised but not entirely shocked. Do you know why that would be? Rourke was quiet for a moment. Harrison has been working on a piece of legislation for the past 8 months. Federal infrastructure funding with some specific allocation provisions that certain people find inconvenient. Inconvenient enough to, I'm not speculating out loud in a room with 2 federal agents, he said. Fair, she said. She heard him almost smile. Not quite. You're very calm for someone who just overrode a chief of surgery, broke 3 administrative protocols, and saved a senator's life. I'm calm because getting uncalm doesn't help anyone. She stripped off her gloves, dropped them in the waste bin. And I've worked in environments where the consequences of losing your calm were significantly more permanent than getting your badge pulled. Kandahar, he said. She didn't answer. She moved to the chart, made her notation time dose response attending authority reference. She wrote it all down clearly and correctly because in her experience, the paperwork was what protected you after the fact, and she had the feeling that after the fact protection was going to matter considerably in the next several hours. Your name is going to be in a federal report by morning, Rourke said quietly. I know. That's going to open some things up. I know that too. Is that a problem? She capped her pen. She thought about the particular bureaucratic scaffolding she'd spent 14 months constructing around herself, the floor nurse identity, the quiet shifts, the deliberate ordinariness, and she thought about how quickly it had just been dismantled by a wrong number and a man who couldn't breathe. It's not a problem, she said. It was always going to happen eventually. Things that need to happen eventually usually just need a catalyst. He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Something that was not quite professional and not quite personal, but occupied the interesting territory between the two. Why a nurse, he asked, after everything? Why here? It was a better question than most people asked, which was why she answered it honestly. Because I spent 6 years keeping people alive in conditions that should have made it impossible, and when I came home, I still needed to keep people alive. This was the version that didn't require me to be someone I wasn't sure I still wanted to be. He was quiet. And tonight, she looked at Senator Harrison, whose color was now something closer to human. Tonight, I remembered that I don't actually get to choose, she said. She walked out of Bay 3. She needed the second pralidoxime dose drawn, and she needed a clear space to think, and she needed approximately 45 seconds where nobody was looking at her or asking her questions or cataloging her competence for their own use. She got about 12 of those seconds before Patricia found her. Mia. Patricia's voice had a texture. She recognized the voice of a woman trying to hold several things at once and not drop any of them. I need you to tell me what is happening down here. Senator Harrison was poisoned. I administered the correct antidote. He's stabilizing. Wright is in the administrator's office right now. I know. He's saying you broke protocol. I broke 3 protocols, Mia said. I accessed ER-controlled substances on floor credentials I administered without a physician cosign, and I contested an active diagnosis in front of the attending team. All of that is true. Patricia stared at her. And you're not worried? I'm worried about the second pralidoxime dose and the organophosphate panel and whether the agents in that room are going to ask me to spend the next 4 hours in a federal building instead of at this hospital where there are still 6 patients on my floor who need a nurse. She looked at Patricia directly. Is Gerald still trying to get out of bed? He's sleeping. Good. Then I need 5 minutes and a clear medication cart, and I'll be back upstairs in 30. Patricia grabbed her arm, not hard, but firmly. Mia, who are you? The question landed differently than it had from Harrison. Harrison was medicated and terrified and reaching for something to hold on to. Patricia was someone who had worked beside her for 14 months, who had covered her shifts and brought her bad coffee and defended her quietly in 3 different conversations with Wright that Mia was not supposed to know about. She said, I'm a nurse. I'm your nurse. That hasn't changed. But before I was someone else, she paused, someone who was good at keeping people alive in situations where most people don't. Patricia let go of her arm. She looked at her for a long moment. The senator would be dead. Yes. Wright had 40 minutes with him. I know. Patricia said nothing for a moment. Then, the administrator wants to see you, Barmam. Of course he does. Tonight. Or get Harrison's second dose in, she said. Not before, but she drew the pralidoxime, documented it went back into Bay 3. The federal agents watched her move to the senator's side without interfering, which meant Rourke had said something to them, or they'd made a call and gotten a clearance. And either way, she was grateful for the 3 minutes of unobstructed work. Harrison was more alert now, alert enough to track her movements. Alert enough to be scared in the functional, productive way rather than the shutdown way, which meant his nervous system was coming back. The second dose, she told him, you might feel nauseated. That's normal. The nurse, he said, what did they tell you about me? She looked at him. Nothing. Why would anyone tell me anything about you, Rourke? His eyes moved toward the door. He's out there. Why is he here? He came to help. Daniel Rourke doesn't go anywhere to help, Harrison said. Daniel Rourke goes place because he has a reason. Do you know him? She administered the dose. She said, I texted him by accident. Harrison stared at her. You what? Wrong number, she said. It's a long story. He made a sound that was almost a laugh, ragged around the edges, the laugh of a man who had almost died and was still trying to make sense of the mechanics of why he hadn't. Wrong number, he repeated. I almost died tonight, and I was saved because someone sent a wrong number text. That's not entirely accurate, she said. You were saved because I recognized your presentation. The wrong number just got the right people in the room faster. He was quiet for a moment. What did they tell you before you came in here? What did Rourke tell you? He told me about a federal infrastructure contract and a Thursday meeting worth $300 million. Harrison's expression changed. Something moved behind his eyes that she filed carefully. That's all he said. That's what he said, yes. There's more, Harrison said. There's considerably more than that. And if you're going to be in this, and you are whether you chose it or not, you need to understand what you're standing in the middle of. She looked at him. She thought about Rourke outside in the hallway, and the federal agents by the door, and Wright in the administrator's office, and her 6 patients upstairs who needed a nurse. Senator, she said, you have approximately 11 minutes before I need to check your response levels. If you want to tell me something in those 11 minutes, I'm listening. He told her. It came out in fragments the way important things did when someone had just been dragged back from the edge of their own death. Not linear, not polished, but real. The infrastructure bill was a cover, not a corrupt cover, not the kind of thing that ended careers, but a vehicle. A specific allocation of federal funding routed through a framework that Harrison had been building for 18 months, a framework designed to expose a particular network of contractors who had been laundering defense money through civilian infrastructure projects for 11 years. Billions of dollars, 17 companies, 4 sitting senators who were compromised. And the evidence, the financial forensics, the contractor records, the communications was sitting in a secure server that Harrison was the only person with access to, and 3 people in Washington knew it existed, and 2 of them were people he trusted completely, and 1 of them he wasn't sure about anymore. Mia listened. She watched his vitals while he talked. She kept her face neutral and her breathing even, and she did not interrupt him because she had been in rooms where a person needed to say something out loud to make it real, and the most important skill in those rooms was the ability to receive information without reacting to it. When he finished, the room was quiet. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you saved my life, and you didn't have to, he said, and because you know Rourke, and Rourke is one of the 3 people. She went very still. Rourke is one of the people who knows about the server, Harrison said. I told him 6 weeks ago he was helping me structure the financial documentation. He paused. And I need you to understand that I don't know which category he's in. I don't know if he's someone I trust or the one I'm not sure about. She stood at the senator's bedside with the empty syringe in her hand and the monitor beeping steadily beside her, and 6 weeks of accidental text messages running through the back of her mind like a reel of footage she was suddenly seeing differently. I know. Come over anyway. I was waiting for the right moment. Harrison. The name before she'd said it. Before she'd given him any reason to know the senator was in this hospital. She looked at the door. Through the glass panel, she could see the hallway. She could see one of the federal agents. She could see further down the back of a suit jacket that she recognized. When did you tell him? She asked. Her voice was exactly as calm as it always was, which was the voice of someone who had learned that calm was the only container strong enough to hold the really dangerous things. 6 weeks ago, Harrison said, the 19th. 6 weeks ago, the same week the misdirected text had started. The same week Daniel Rourke had received the first accidental message from a wrong number and said nothing and apparently decided to wait. She set the syringe down. She straightened. She looked at Harrison and said, Your vitals are good. I'm going to ask one of the agents to come in and stay with you. Don't tell them what you told me. Not yet. Why not yet? Because until we know which category Rourke is in, she said, we don't know who those agents answer to. Harrison stared at her. She watched him absorb it, the particular vertigo of realizing that the room you were in could not be fully trusted, that the help you were surrounded by might be 2 different things at once. You've been in this situation before, he said. Yes. What do? You stay calm, she said. You keep your information contained, and you figure out who in the room you can actually trust before you give anyone else the weapon. She walked to the door. She put her hand on it. She paused. Behind her, Harrison said quietly, Captain Chen. She stopped. Whatever happens next, he said. Thank you. She pushed the door open and walked into the hallway where Daniel Rourke was waiting, and she looked at him with the same expression she always wore, the one that told nothing and asked everything, and she said, we need to talk. He looked at her. Something moved in his face that she was now watching much more carefully than she had been 5 minutes ago. Yes, he said, I think we do. There was a family consultation room at the end of the ER hallway that nobody used after midnight. One chair with a torn armrest, a box of tissues on a side table, a clock on the wall that ran 4 minutes fast. Mia had sat in this room once before 3 months into her rotation delivering news to a woman whose husband hadn't made it off the table, and she had chosen it now for the same reason she'd chosen it then. Nobody walked past it on purpose. Nobody had a reason to be near it unless they were already in it. She closed the door behind them. She did not sit down. Rourke stood across from her and watched her with the same quality of attention he'd had since the moment she turned around in the supply room and found him standing there, not passive attention, not the polite attention of a man managing a social situation, but the focused, calibrated attention of someone gathering information in real time and weighting it as it arrived. She said, "How did you know Harrison was at this hospital before I told you?" He didn't hesitate. His chief of staff called me. "You said that. I'm asking something different. I told you there was a patient, and you said his name before I said anything else." His chief of staff called you about a scheduling conflict. Why would a scheduling conflict make you think of a hospital? Something shifted in his face. Not guilt, not evasion, more like a man making a decision about how much of a locked room to open. "Because Harrison texted me at 11:03, he said, before the chief of staff called. He said something's wrong, 2 words, then nothing. His phone went dark." Mia looked at him. "And you didn't call anyone?" "I called his security detail. They said he was in the ER. I was already in the car." "You were already in the car before you texted me?" "Yes." "So when I texted you by accident at 11:43, you already knew he was here?" "Yes." She let that sit for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me that up front?" "Because I didn't know who you were yet. I knew your name. I knew your shifts. I knew you worked the East Wing and ate terrible vending machine sandwiches at 11:30 on Tuesdays. I didn't know whether you were the right person to walk into that room." "You ran me," she said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was just the thing that was true. Between the time I texted you and the time you got here, you ran my background." He didn't deny it. "I had 40 minutes in a car with a driver and a phone, yes." "What did you find?" "Captain Mia Chen, 68th Medical Brigade. 3 citations for field medicine under direct fire. 1 classified operation in Mosul that I had to make 2 calls to get partial access to, and the partial access was enough." He paused. "I found that you were the most qualified person in this building to handle what was happening to Harrison. And then I found your text in my inbox, and I thought either this is the most extraordinary coincidence of my adult life, or something is happening that I don't fully understand yet." "Which one did you land on?" "I'm still deciding," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. She was doing the same thing she always did in rooms with people who knew how to control information, parsing not what they said, but the shape of what they were choosing not to say. He was holding something back, not maliciously, strategically, which was its own kind of answer. "Harrison told me something," she said. Rurik waited. "He told me about the server." The quality of the silence that followed was specific. Not surprised there was too much stillness in him for it to be surprise. Something more interior. Something that moved through him without showing on his face except in the slight involuntary stillness that happened when a person heard something that hit a nerve they'd been protecting. "What did he tell you?" Rourke said. "That you're one of 3 people who knows it exists, that you've known for 6 weeks, that he told you on the 19th. She watched him. "He also told me he doesn't know which category you're in." "Category?" "Trusted," she said. "Or not." Rourke was quiet for a long moment. The clock on the wall ticked. It was 4 minutes 5, which meant it was showing 12:41 when it was actually 12:37, and Mia registered that in the part of her brain that always tracked time the way other people tracked exits. "He's right to be uncertain," Rourke said finally. She felt something tighten in her chest. Meaning that I found out 3 weeks ago that one of the other 2 people he trusted had been compromised. I've been trying to figure out how to tell Harrison without spooking him, and before I got to that conversation, someone put a nerve agent derivative in his water glass." He looked at her directly. "I did not do that. I want that stated clearly." Who was the compromised contact? A man named Philip Garrett, deputy director of a federal oversight office. He's been feeding information to at least one of the contractors on Harrison's list for the past 4 months. You're certain? I have documentation. Why haven't you given it to federal agents? Because Garrett has 3 federal agents on retainer, Rourke said, and I didn't know which ones until about 6 days ago, and 2 of the 3 agents currently standing in that ER hallway worked under Garrett's office for 18 months. Mia stood very still. She thought about what she'd said to Harrison. Until we know which category Rourke is in, we don't know who those agents answer to. She had been right about the premise and wrong about the specific risk. The agents out there, she said, at least one of them, possibly both. You're telling me the federal protection currently surrounding a poisoned senator may be compromised. I'm telling you it's possible. I'm not certain about both of them. He paused. I'm certain about one. Which one? The one who isn't carrying visibly. She thought about the 2 men who had walked into Bay 3. The one with the badge clipped to his belt. The one whose jacket fit wrong around the shoulder. The one carrying was the visible one, which meant the one who wasn't was the one she needed to worry about. His name, she said. Keating, Andrew Keating. He's been in Garrett's pocket since a financial problem 3 years ago that Garrett made disappear. Rourke's voice was level. He's been in that hallway for 40 minutes and Harrison's room has a window. Mia moved. She was out the door before the sentence fully ended because in her experience, the window between knowing and doing was where people died and she was not in the business of standing in that window. The hallway was exactly as she'd left it, except that Patricia was at the nurse's station and the 2 agents were in their same positions and Bay 3's door was closed. She looked at the window. The blind was pulled. She exhaled. She walked to the nurse's station. She said to Patricia quietly, I need you to move Senator Harrison out of Bay 3. Patricia stared at her. What? Room complication. We need him in a monitored room upstairs. 12 preferably. It has 2 exits. Mia, I can't move a federal. You can and you should because his condition warrants it and his attending physician is Dr. Vaughn, who will agree with me. She looked at Patricia with the specific directness she normally kept sheathed. Please, Patricia, right now. Patricia looked at her face. Patricia was 61 years old and had been a charge nurse for 22 years and had seen every variety of human urgency that a hospital could produce. She looked at Mia's face and she picked up her phone and called Dr. Vaughn and said the senator needed a private monitored room on 12 and could they arrange the transfer? And Vaughn, who had arrived 7 minutes ago and was already reading the chart with the expression of a man catching up on a very fast train, said yes. Rourke was at her shoulder. Keating is going to follow the transfer. I know. You need him separated from Harrison before. I know, she said again. I need 5 minutes to think. You don't have 5 minutes. Then I need 3. She looked at him. You have documentation on Garrett. Is it accessible right now? It's on a secure drive. Can you transmit it from your phone? To whom? Who do you trust in any agency, any office? One name? Someone who can receive documentation and act on it tonight. He was quiet for 2 full seconds, which for Rourke felt like a long time. Then he said a name. Agent Carol Briggs, FBI Financial Crimes. She's been working the contractor network independently for 6 months. She doesn't know about the server, but she knows about the money. Call her, Mia said, right now. Don't wait until the transfer. Call her while Keating is watching a hallway and thinks the most dangerous person in this building is a recovering senator in a bed. Something moved across Rourke's face that she thought might be the closest he came to being surprised. He pulled out his phone. She walked toward Bay 3. She pushed the door open. Both agents turned. She looked at the one without the visible weapon, Keating, and she said, Senator Harrison is being transferred to a monitored room on the 12th floor. Dr. Vaughn's orders. We're moving in 4 minutes. Keating's expression shifted by approximately 2 millimeters. A person not trained to read faces would have missed it entirely. Mia did not miss it. It was the micro-expression of a man recalculating, and what he was recalculating was whether the new location worked better or worse for something he'd already planned. We'll need to sweep the room before transfer, he said. Of course, she said. You can ride up with the senator. She turned to the other agent, the one with the badge on his belt, and said, Can I ask your name? Torres, he said. Agent Marcus Torres. Agent Torres, I need to ask you something outside. Just a quick clinical question about his blood draw protocol. The lab needs federal authorization for the organophosphate panel. Torres looked at Keating. Keating nodded slightly. Torres followed her into the hallway. She walked him 12 feet from the door and turned to face him and said quietly and directly, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to do it without reacting visibly. Can you do that? Torres looked at her. He had the face of a careful man. Depends what you're about to say. Your partner is compromised. His name is Andrew Keating, and he has a financial relationship with a man named Philip Garrett, who is connected to the people who poisoned Senator Harrison tonight. She watched his face. She saw it, the tightening, the assessment, the conflict between professional skepticism and the cellular recognition of something true. I have documentation. My associate is transmitting it to Agent Carol Briggs at FBI Financial Crimes right now. But for the next 4 minutes, Keating is going to be in a room with the senator during a transfer, and I need you to be present for every second of that. Torres said nothing for 3 seconds. Who are you? Someone who has been in this position before, she said. Captain Mia Chen's 68th Medical Brigade retired, and I need an answer. Torres looked at the door of Bay 3. He looked at her. He said, I've had questions about Keating for 2 months. Then trust the questions, she said. Stay with the senator. Don't let Keating have a solo moment with him. Not during transfer, not in the elevator, not in the new room, until Briggs confirms receipt of the documentation. Torres said, the documentation better be solid. It is, said a voice behind her. She turned. Rourke had his phone in his hand. Briggs confirmed receipt 40 seconds ago. She's dispatching a field team. 20 minutes. Torres looked at Rourke. He looked at Mia. He made a decision with his face before he made it with his body. She saw it settle, and then he turned and walked back into Bay 3 without another word. The next 4 minutes were the kind that felt stretched the way time moved when you were holding multiple things in tension and none of them were fully in your control. Mia stood in the hallway and monitored the transfer preparation through the window and watched Keating's body language with the systematic attention of someone reading a tactical situation, which was exactly what it was. Keating was good. She gave him that. His tells were minimal, a slightly too casual positioning near the head of the gurney, a hand that moved toward his jacket pocket and then stopped a twice-checked phone that he put away with the deliberate normalcy of someone managing their own behavior. He knew something was off. He didn't know what. Torres didn't leave his side for a single second. The gurney rolled out. Harrison's eyes found Mia as he passed, and she gave him one small nod, steady, nothing to show, and he held her gaze for exactly long enough to tell her he understood. She let out a breath. That was exceptionally well executed, Rourke said beside her. It's not done yet. No, he agreed, but the worst window is closed. She leaned against the wall and felt the weight of the last 2 hours arrive all at once in her legs, which was where exhaustion always went in her body, not her head, not her shoulders, her legs specifically, the place just above the knees where the standing and the moving and the staying upright accumulated until she was alone enough to let it settle. You need to sit down, he said. I need to check on my patients on 12, so. And then you need to sit down. She looked at him. You came here to help Harrison. Yes. But you also came here because of the text. He was quiet for a moment. The text told me where you were. I already wanted to know where you were. Why him still? Because someone who sends 6 weeks of accidental messages about bad vending machine sandwiches and night shifts is either the most ordinary person in Chicago or the most thoroughly constructed cover of ordinary I've ever encountered. He paused. I was curious which one. And now you know. And now I know, he said. She pushed off the wall. The administrator wants to see me. I know, I'll come with you. You don't need to do that. I know that too, he said, and fell into step beside her, and she led him because in 14 months at St. Catherine's, she had walked every difficult hallway alone, and tonight it turned out there was exactly one person in this building whose presence she didn't want to subtract. The administrator's name was Richard Holt, and Richard Holt was the kind of man who had never once in his career made a decision that couldn't be justified in a board meeting, which meant that what he understood and what was actually true occupied very different addresses. He was waiting in his office with his hands folded on his desk, and the expression of a man who had been pulled out of a comfortable situation into an uncomfortable one and wanted to distribute the discomfort as efficiently as possible. Wright was there too, sitting to the left with his chart on his knee waiting. Mia walked in, Rourke walked in behind her. Holt looked at Rourke the way people always looked at Rourke, with the immediate recalibration that significant wealth produced in people who understood what it meant, and the speech Holt had clearly prepared underwent a rapid, quiet revision. "Ms. Chen," Holt said, "I need to discuss tonight's series of events." "Of course," she said. "You accessed controlled substances outside your floor designation. You administered medication without a physician co-signature. You contested an active diagnosis in front of the attending team." He paused. "These are serious protocol violations." "They are," she said. Wright shifted in his chair. He was waiting, she realized, for her to defend herself, because people who broke rules to prove a point always defended themselves, and he had his counter-argument prepared, and he was sitting there with it coiled and ready. She didn't defend herself. She said, "Senator Harrison is alive. His blood work will confirm organophosphate exposure within the hour. Dr. Vaughn is the attending of record. I have complete documentation of every action I took, time-stamped and countersigned." She looked at Holt. "If the protocol outcome is that a patient dies and the paperwork is clean, I think we have a problem with the protocols." Holt opened his mouth. Wright said she had no authority. "Dr. Vaughn's authority superseded mine the moment Mr. Rourke invoked the board's governance provision," Mia said, turning to look at Wright directly, "which is a mechanism that exists specifically for situations where standard chain of command produces an inadequate outcome. Tonight it produced exactly the outcome it was designed to produce." Wright looked at her with the full force of everything he had. The seniority, the reputation, the accumulated institutional momentum of a PA who had never once been this directly contradicted by someone 14 months out of nursing school. And then, because he was fundamentally intelligent even when he was wrong, she watched him arrive at the edge of the argument and recognized that the ground on the other side of it was not solid. The senator was alive. The blood work was coming. The federal agents were upstairs, and the man sitting next to Mia Chen owned 40% of this hospital's capital foundation. Wright said nothing. Into that silence, Holt's phone rang. He looked at it. He answered it. He listened for approximately 20 seconds, and his expression went through 4 different rooms. He put the phone down and looked at Mia. "That was the senator's office," he said. "He's asking to see you." A pause. "He's also asked that no administrative action be taken against any staff member involved in his treatment tonight. By name." He said, "Your name specifically." Wright stood up. He picked up his chart. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and turned and looked at Mia one last time, and what was in his face then was not anger. It was something older and less comfortable than anger, something that lived in the place where a person's understanding of themselves met something that didn't fit. He left without a word. Holt said, "Ms. Chen, I think we'll revisit protocol questions at a later date." "That's fine," she said. She walked out of the office. Rourke was behind her, and the hallway was quiet, and somewhere above them on the 12th floor, a senator was alive in a monitored room with a federal agent who was choosing to trust the right questions. And 20 minutes away, a field team was moving toward this building, and in the morning the blood work would come back and tell the story that the monitor had already told, and the whole fragile architecture of this night would either hold or it wouldn't. She stopped in the middle of the hallway. She stood still for a moment, just breathing. Rourke said, "You're shaking." "I know," she said. "Is that new?" "No," she said. "It always comes after, never during, just after." He said nothing. He didn't offer comfort, and he didn't minimize it, and he didn't make it about himself, and she stood there in the hallway of St. Catherine's Hospital with her hands finally unsteady, and the whole night pressing down from every direction, and she thought, not for the first time but differently than before, that the wrong number had landed in a very particular inbox. "Rourke," she said. "Yes." "The third person, the one who knows about the server, the one Harrison is still not sure about." She turned to look at him. "Who is it?" He held her gaze. He was quiet for exactly long enough that she knew the answer before he said it. "Me," he said. "I'm all 3. Harrison gave me access because he trusted me and then spent 6 weeks deciding whether that trust was warranted." "And is it," he said, Ask me again in the morning, when the field team gets here and the documentation lands, and you can see everything I've given Briggs. Then decide. She looked at him. She thought about the server and the contractors and Garrett and Keating and the wrong number texts and a man who had sat on 6 weeks of accidental messages and waited for the right moment. She thought about every person she had ever had to decide to trust in a situation where the cost of being wrong was permanent. She said, "Ask me something first. Anything." "The 19th, she said, "when Harrison told you about the server, what did you do first?" He was quiet. "I made a call," he said. "I called a forensic accountant in DC, and I asked her to start building a parallel documentation chain in case anything happened to Harrison's server. Redundancy, evidence protection." He paused. "The second thing I did was go back through my phone for misdirected texts and realize I'd been receiving accidental messages from a St. Catherine's nurse for 3 weeks. And I thought that was either nothing he said, or it was the most interesting thing that had happened to me in a very long time." She stood in the hallway and she looked at him, and she understood that the decision she was in the middle of was not a small one, and she had never once in her life made a significant decision that felt small when she was making it. "In the morning," she said. "In the morning," he agreed. She went upstairs to check on her patients. Gerald was awake again, arguing with the night aide about his tomatoes. Room 412 was sleeping. Down the hall in room 12, a senator lay in a monitored bed with an agent standing outside his door and a blood draw in a lab somewhere beneath them that was going to confirm everything and shift everything and pull the next thread in a chain that started with a wrong digit in a phone contact on a Tuesday night. She sat down at the nurse's station. She picked up a chart. She started her notes. Her hands had stopped shaking. The blood work came back at 2:17 in the morning. Patricia brought the results personally, which meant she'd been waiting for them, which meant she understood that this was not routine paperwork and had decided on her own to treat it accordingly. She set the printout on the nurse's station counter in front of Mia without a word and watched Mia read it and watched her face. And when Mia looked up, Patricia said, "Confirmed." "Confirmed," Mia said. "Organophosphate compound. The lab is flagging it as a modified structure, not commercially available. Synthesized." Patricia sat down in the chair across from her. She was a woman who had seen a lot of things in 22 years and had developed the specific stillness of someone who processes shock quietly and completely before allowing it to show. She processed this for approximately 4 seconds. Then she said, "Someone made this specifically for him. That's what the lab is telling us tonight at a fundraiser in Chicago." "Yes." Patricia looked at the ceiling. She said, "I've been a nurse since before you were born. I have never once," she stopped. "This is not a hospital problem anymore." "It stopped being a hospital problem around midnight," Mia said. "What is it now?" "Something I've seen pieces of before," Mia said. "Just in different buildings." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Are you in danger?" The question landed simply the way Patricia asked everything. No theater, no inflation, just a direct delivery of someone who had decided that straight questions saved time and protected people better than careful ones. Mia looked at her and thought about Keating upstairs and Garrett in Washington and the documentation moving through encrypted channels toward Carol Briggs. And she said, "I don't think so. Not right now." "That's not a no." "No," Mia said, "it's not." Patricia picked up the printout. She looked at it. She set it back down. "What do you need from me?" It was the right question. It was the only question, actually, and the fact that Patricia asked it without preamble or negotiation was why Mia had trusted her from the 3rd week of employment when Patricia had covered for her in a charting error that wasn't actually an error, but looked like one, and Wright had been building toward a reprimand. Patricia had looked at the chart, understood what Mia had actually done, and told Wright the notation was correct. No discussion, no favor collected afterward. "I need you to make sure nobody on the floor discusses the blood work results outside of direct clinical need," Mia said. "The lab has already been instructed to flag the report as restricted, but people talk. People in this building talk constantly." "I know." "I'll handle it," Patricia said. She stood. She started to leave and then stopped. She turned around. She said, "Wright went home." "I know. He was here until 1:30. He sat in his office for almost an hour after the administrator's meeting. Patricia paused. I've worked with Lawrence Wright for 11 years. I have never seen him sit alone in his office. Mia said nothing. He's not a bad doctor, Patricia said. He's a bad person sometimes, but he's not a bad doctor. I know that, Mia said. I never said he was. I know you didn't. Patricia paused. I just thought someone should say it out loud, in case it matters later. She left. Mia sat with the blood work results in front of her and the quiet of the floor around her, and thought about Lawrence Wright sitting alone in his office for an hour in the middle of the night, and thought about what it cost a person to be wrong in the specific way he had been wrong tonight. Not wrong about a medication or a dosage, but wrong about a human being standing right in front of him, wrong in the way that had nearly become permanent. She didn't have the luxury of thinking about it long. Her phone buzzed. Briggs confirmed. Field team is in the building. Come to 12. She read Rourke's text. She stood. She took the blood work results with her. The 12th floor was different at 2:30 in the morning than it was during daylight. Quieter, obviously, but also more honest the way places were when the performance layer fell away. The two agents she'd expected were there, Torres outside Harrison's door, and Keating was the one that mattered. Keating, who was standing 12 feet from the elevator, with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the body language of a man who had been recalculating his situation for 2 hours and was running out of time to finish. 3 people Mia didn't know were coming off the elevator as she arrived. 2 of them had the particular bearing economy of movement eyes that cataloged a room in the time it took most people to find the light switch that she recognized from years of working alongside federal personnel in the field. The third was a woman in her mid-40s with short gray-streaked hair and the expression of someone who had been awake for 19 hours and intended to be awake for 19 more if that was what the situation required. Agent Briggs, Mia said. Briggs looked at her. Captain Chen. She said it the way the other agent had said it earlier, not as a question, as an acknowledgement, the particular efficiency of someone who had read a file and was filing away the confirmation of what the file said. Where's Rourke? Inside, Torres said from the door. Briggs looked at Keating. Keating looked at Briggs. And in the 2 seconds that passed between them, Mia watched something resolve the specific cold resolution of a man who had spent 2 hours wondering if his cover was intact and just received the answer. Keating's hand moved. Torres was faster. She had underestimated Torres, she realized, because Torres had the face of a careful man, and careful men sometimes move slowly, and Torres did not. He moved with the economic speed of someone who had been waiting for exactly this and had positioned himself accordingly, and Keating's hand stopped moving and the hallway went very still, and one of Briggs's people had Keating's arm before the situation finished forming. Andrew Keating, Briggs said, you're being detained for questioning in connection with a federal investigation. You have the right to remain silent. Keating said nothing. He looked at the floor. He had the expression of a man arriving at the end of something, and it was not defiance. It was just the flat exhaustion of a person whose plan had run out of road. Mia stood in the hallway and breathed. Torres looked at her across the space and gave her the small, precise nod of a man paying a specific debt. She pushed open Harrison's door. Rourke was standing near the window. Harrison was propped up in the bed, more color in him now, the recovery moving through him with the slow determination of a body that had been pulled back from a real edge and was finding its footing. He looked at Mia when she walked in, and his face did something complicated, relief, and something that went deeper than relief, the expression of a man who had been holding an enormous weight and felt it shift. Blood work confirmed, she said. The lab is flagging it as synthesized. Modified organophosphate, not commercially sourced. Harrison closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were clear and hard. Garrett. Briggs is here, Mia said. Keating is in custody in the hallway. Harrison looked at Rourke. Something passed between them, the compressed communication of 2 people who had been moving around the same information from different directions for months and were now in the same room with it. The server, Harrison said. Briggs has the documentation, Rourke said. The financial chain, the contractor, records the communication intercepts. Everything I built over the past 6 weeks. Harrison was quiet for a moment. 6 weeks? He looked at Mia. He was building it while you were accidentally texting him about vending machine sandwiches. Apparently, she said. And you still don't know whether to trust him? She looked at Rourke. Rourke looked back at her with the same quality of attention he'd had since the supply room, steady and direct and genuinely without performance. I know more than I did 3 hours ago, she said. That's not a yes. It's not a no either, she said. I've learned to treat those the same until the morning. Harrison made the ragged sound that was his version of a laugh. I like her, he said to Rourke. I like her considerably. Briggs came in. She looked at the three of them with the efficient assessment of someone who had walked into the middle of a dynamic and needed to understand it quickly. She pulled up a chair without being invited, opened a notepad, and looked at Mia. I need a full account of tonight, from the moment you identified the presentation. Of course, Mia said, and I need to know how you identified it. Kandahar 2016, Mia said. Water source contamination with a locally synthesized compound. Similar tremor pattern, similar blood pressure curve, similar timeline from exposure to presentation. You served under Colonel Mark Reyes's unit. Mia paused. Yes. I know his work, Briggs said, and the way she said it told Mia that Briggs had not arrived at Mia's file tonight for the first time. You were recommended to a joint task force in 2018. You declined. I did. Why? The room was quiet. Rourke was watching her. Harrison was watching her. Briggs had her pen on the notepad and was watching her with the professional patience of a woman who had learned to wait for real answers. Because I was 28 years old and I had watched 6 people I considered family die in the span of 14 months, Mia said, and I needed to be somewhere that felt like it was about keeping people away rather than managing the acceptable cost of losing them. She paused. A hospital seemed like the right architecture. Nobody said anything for a moment. Briggs wrote something. And tonight, does tonight change that calculation? Ask me when it's over, Mia said. Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned to Harrison and began her formal questioning, and Mia moved to the side of the room and let the procedural machinery take over because procedural machinery was what came after the hard part. And the hard part tonight had involved 2 syringes in a family consultation room and a man in a suit who had been waiting for the right moment for 6 weeks. The questioning went on for 40 minutes. Harrison gave Briggs the server access credentials. Briggs made 3 calls. 2 of those calls, by the calibrated shift in her expression, produced results she'd been waiting for. The third produced a result that made her set the phone down and look at the ceiling for approximately 3 seconds before saying flatly, Garrett resigned 40 minutes ago. His office says a personal matter. His assistant apparently found his resignation letter when she checked the secure message system at 2 a.m. Harrison said he ran. He's not running anywhere, Briggs said. We have people at his home and both his offices, but the resignation, the timing of it, she looked at Rourke. Someone told him that the documentation had been transmitted. Someone told him tonight. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. It meant a leak. It meant that the channel Rourke had used to reach Briggs, which had seemed secure, had a hole in it somewhere, and Garrett had seen through that hole and done the one thing a man in his position could do before the walls came fully down, created legal distance between himself and his federal title. Rourke's jaw tightened. Just slightly. My forensic accountant, he said. I called her when I was in the car. I asked her to activate the parallel documentation chain. Her name, Briggs said, Sandra Voss. She's been clean for 15 years. Then it wasn't her, Briggs said. It was the channel, not the person. Your call was flagged somewhere between you and her. She paused. Which means someone has been monitoring your communications. The room absorbed that. Mia watched Rourke absorb it, specifically watched the thing that moved through him, which was not panic and not surprise, but something more controlled and more dangerous. The recalibration of a man who had believed his operational security was intact and was revising that belief in real time. For how long, he said. That's what I need to find out, Briggs said. She stood. She closed her notepad. She looked at Mia. You're going to be in my report. You understand what that means. It means my name surfaces in a federal investigation, Mia said. I've thought about that. It also means your background surfaces, Briggs said. The classified operation in Mosul, the task force referral, all of it. I know. Some people are going to be interested in that background. Some people were always going to be interested in it eventually, Mia said. Tonight just moved the timeline. Briggs looked at her steadily. There's a position, she said, has been for 2 years. Joint Medical Intelligence Unit attached to a federal task force that operates domestically. They've needed someone with your specific combination of clinical and operational experience for longer than I've been aware of the unit. The room went very quiet. I'm a nurse, Mia said. You're a nurse? A nurse who identified a synthesized nerve agent derivative by clinical presentation in a civilian ER, at midnight separated a compromised federal agent from a protected witness, and coordinated a documentation transfer that took down a deputy federal director. Briggs paused. You can be a nurse. The position doesn't require you to stop being one. It requires you to occasionally be other things too. Mia looked at Harrison. Harrison was watching her with the expression of a man who had a perspective on this and was choosing not to impose it. She looked at Rourke. Rourke's face was neutral in the way faces were neutral when the person behind them was working hard to stay out of an answer that wasn't theirs to give. She said, I'll think about it. Briggs said, that's the first time anyone has said that to that offer. She almost smiled. Usually people either say yes immediately or no immediately. Usually people haven't just worked a double shift, Mia said. Briggs left. One of her people stayed in the hallway with Torres. The building had the particular quality it got in the deep middle of the night past 3 a.m., when even the institutional urgency settled into something slower and more human. Harrison's eyes were heavy. The adrenaline that had been keeping him sharp was metabolizing out of him, and what was replacing it was the bone-deep exhaustion of a body that had spent several hours not knowing if it was going to survive. Get some sleep, Mia told him. I need to call my wife. It's 3 a.m. She's been awake since his detail called her, Harrison said. She's been awake since 11:15, and I haven't told her I'm all right. His voice cracked slightly just at the edge of the last word, and he caught it and held it, but she heard it, and she thought about his wife, somewhere in this city, who had been sitting with the worst kind of not knowing for 4 hours. She handed him the hospital phone. She walked to the far end of the room and stood with her back to him while he made the call, because some things deserve privacy, even when privacy was hard to come by, and she stood there and listened to him say, I'm all right, sweetheart. I'm all right. She heard the way he said it 3 times, and she heard what it meant, which was not just information but reassurance. The specific reassurance of a person who understands that the people who love them have been holding their breath. Rourke appeared beside her. He had 2 cups of coffee from the family waiting area down the hall, the terrible vending machine kind, and he held one out to her, and she took it without comment because it was 3 a.m, and terrible coffee was better than no coffee, and she was past the point of preferences. He's going to be fine, Rourke said quietly. Not about Harrison's health, about everything. Maybe, she said. The documentation is solid. Briggs has enough to move on Garrett and at least 3 of the contractors tonight. The server access opens the financial records, and that's the piece they've needed for... I know, she said. I'm not worried about Garrett. What are you worried about? She drank the terrible coffee and thought about how to answer that honestly. The monitoring, she said. Your communications were flagged, which means someone was watching Rourke Capital Group at a level that required either a federal warrant or a very sophisticated private operation. And Garrett resigned instead of being arrested, which means he has a plan, and men with plans who are cornered are more dangerous than men who are caught. Rourke was quiet. You think he's going to surface again? I think he's going to try to contain it, and the thing he most needs to contain now is the server and the documentation. She looked at him, which means the people closest to those things are going to get attention they don't want. Briggs has the documentation. Briggs has a copy, Mia said. Harrison has the original access, and you have the parallel chain. She looked at him over the rim of the terrible coffee cup. And I'm the nurse who identified the poisoning and put every piece of tonight in motion. Garrett is going to know that by morning. Rourke set down his coffee. He turned to look at her fully, and there was something in his face that was not quite the controlled assessment she'd been reading for the past 4 hours. Something that way had dropped one layer below that. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, he said. She looked at him. That's not something you can promise. It's something I intend to work very hard toward. Intending and doing are different buildings, she said. I've lived in both. Then tell me what doing looks like from where you stand, he said. Tell me what you actually need. She thought about that. She thought about Kandahar and Mosul and 14 months of ordinary shifts, and Marcus's three-word text, and a wrong number that had somehow deposited her here in a hospital room at 3 in the morning with a recovering senator and a man she'd known for 4 hours and an FBI agent's offer sitting in the back of her mind like a door she hadn't decided whether to open. "I need to know who was monitoring your communications," she said. "I need that answered before morning, because morning is when Garrett makes his next move, and I don't want to be reactive. I want to know the board before he plays the next piece." Rourke pulled out his phone. "I have someone who can work that. He's fast." "How fast?" 90 minutes. She checked the clock on the wall. 3:14. "Call him," she said. He called. She listened to the half-conversation, sparse technical, the vocabulary of someone talking to a person who understood systems architecture at the level where it became its own language. Rourke gave 3 parameters. The person on the other end asked 2 questions. Rourke answered both in under 10 words each. The call lasted 4 minutes. He put the phone down. "He'll have something by 4:30. "Good," she said. Harrison had finished his call. He was lying back with his eyes closed, not sleeping, just resting in the way people rested when their nervous system was still running at elevated speed, but the body had finally given the legs out from under it. His hand was flat on the bed still. The tremor was gone. Mia checked his monitor, checked his IV line, made her notation on his chart with the same careful documentation she applied to everything because the paperwork was always the thing that held when everything else had moved. "You don't stop," Rourke said. "Stop what?" "Working, even now, even in the middle of..." He gestured slightly at the everything of the night. "You just keep working." "Someone has to," she said. "You could let someone else take the next check." "There is no one else right now. Torres is outside. The night resident is covering 3 other floors." She set down the chart. "This is what I do. It's not heroic. It's just what I do." "I know," he said. "That's what I'm talking about." She looked at him. The hallway light was coming under the door, and it was quiet, and she was tired in the specific way she got tired when she'd been operating at maximum capacity for too long. The tiredness that lived just behind her eyes and in the muscles of her forearms and nowhere else because everywhere else she'd learned to wall off. "Why did you wait?" she asked. 6 weeks of accidental texts and you never said a word." He was quiet for a moment. "Because I was in the middle of something that required me to be careful about who I brought close," he said. "And because the messages were I don't know. They were very ordinary, in a way I hadn't encountered in a long time. Ordinary." "You complained about the vending machine 3 times, he said. "You sent a voice memo of yourself humming in a car. You sent a picture of a sandwich with the caption, 'This is technically food,' and that was all the text." He paused. "I work in a world where every communication is managed, where everything a person says to me has been processed before they say it. You were accidentally, completely without intention, the most unmanaged communication I'd received in years." She looked at him. She thought about the voice memo. She hadn't known she'd sent it. She'd been driving home from a late shift singing under her breath to something on the radio, and she'd accidentally triggered the voice recorder and sent it to a number she thought was someone else's. She'd been humming a Patsy Cline song because it had come on, and she'd been too tired to change the station. "Crazy," she said. "What, the song," she said. "It was crazy. Patsy Cline." He looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. "I listened to it 4 times." She stood in the quiet hospital room at 3:17 in the morning, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel tonight, something that had nothing to do with the senator or the blood work or the federal documentation, something much smaller and much more specific than any of that. She felt seen, not assessed, not cataloged, not useful, just seen the way a person was seen when someone had listened to them hum a song in a car 4 separate times and waited 6 weeks for the right moment. She was not ready to say that out loud. She wasn't sure she'd be ready for a while, but she registered it and filed it somewhere that wasn't clinical and wasn't tactical and wasn't any of the categories she usually used, and she thought this is the part that's going to be complicated. At 4:22, Rourke's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His expression shifted by a single degree, which on Rourke was the equivalent of most people's sharp intake of breath. "What is it?" she asked. He turned the phone so she could read the message. 6 words from the person he'd called 90 minutes ago. 4 words that answered her question about the monitoring, and 2 words that changed everything about the shape of the morning. The monitoring wasn't federal, and the second part, the 2 words that changed everything, told her who it was. She read it twice. She looked up at Rourke. "That's not possible," she said. "Apparently it is," he said. She stood in Senator Harrison's room at 4:22 in the morning and looked at the name on Rourke's phone and understood that the thing she'd been calling tonight was not the end of something. It was the middle. The beginning was 6 weeks ago, and the end was still coming, and between here and there was a name she had not expected and a choice she was going to have to make before morning arrived and made it for her. Her hands were steady. They were always steady when it mattered. "Wake Harrison," she said. Harrison was not fully asleep. He was in the thin place between rest and wakefulness that bodies found after serious trauma, close enough to sleep to look peaceful and close enough to the surface, that when Mia said his name quietly, he opened his eyes in under 2 seconds and they were clear. "There's a development," she said. He read her face. People who had been through serious things learned to read faces the way other people read text, and Harrison had been through enough serious things that he sat up before she said the next word. "What kind?" She looked at Rourke. Rourke turned the phone and Harrison read the screen, and his face went through 3 different rooms in about 4 seconds. Disbelief first, then the cold settling recognition of something that had been sitting in the wrong column of his mind for a while and had just been moved to the right one. Then something that was almost grief. "Marcus Hale," Harrison said. "Your chief of staff," Mia said. "Yes." "The one who told you the water tasted fine." Harrison closed his eyes. She watched him absorb it, the specific horrible weight of a betrayal that came with a face attached, a name attached, 14 months of proximity and trust attached. She had seen this before. It looked the same every time, and it never looked anything other than devastating. "He's been with me for 3 years, Harrison said. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." "He was in the room when I decided to build the server," Harrison had said. "He was in the room for the initial meeting with Rourke. He stopped. He opened his eyes. He knew every piece of it. The monitoring on Rourke's communications was routed through a private server registered to a consulting firm," Rourke said. "The firm has a single beneficial owner. The registration is 2 years old." He paused. "Hale set it up 8 months before you started building the infrastructure case." "He was already in place," Harrison said. Before you started," Rourke said. "Yes." The silence that followed had weight to it. Mia let it exist for exactly as long as it needed to before she moved them forward, because grief deserved a moment and operational necessity required more than a moment, and the difference between those 2 things was what the next hour was going to be decided by. "Where is Hale right now?" she asked. Rourke checked his phone. His access badge shows him entering this building at 3:58, 14 minutes ago. Harrison sat straight up. "He's here." "He came in through the main entrance," Rourke said. "Signed in as family support staff for Senator Harrison. The desk logged him through." Mia was already at the door. She pulled it open. Torres was in the hallway and she said, "Harrison's chief of staff, Marcus Hale, is in this building. He is a person of interest in a federal investigation. He cannot reach this room." Torres moved. He had his radio in his hand before she finished the sentence, and he was talking into it as he moved down the hallway, and that was Torres handled. She pulled the door closed and turned back into the room. Harrison was swinging his legs off the bed with the slow, careful movement of a man whose body was still 60% through a recovery and whose mind was 100% done waiting. "Senator?" She used the voice, the one she'd used on men twice his size who were trying to pull their own IVs out. "You are not getting out of that bed. Hale is in this building." "I know that. Torres is handling it." Torres doesn't know what Hale knows. He doesn't know where the bodies are buried. He doesn't know the operational scope. And you getting out of bed and into a hallway in a hospital gown doesn't change any of that, she said. What it does is take you out of a monitored room and put you somewhere less contained, which is exactly what Hale wants if he came here to finish what the water glass started. Harrison stopped. He looked at her. He was a senator, which meant he was a person accustomed to being the one in the room whose judgment overrode other people's. And she was a nurse who had been working for 26 consecutive hours, and they looked at each other across that gap, and she held his gaze without moving, and after 3 seconds, he put his legs back on the bed. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. Just find him. She was already looking at Rourke. Briggs? Rourke called Briggs. Briggs picked up on the first ring, which meant that she hadn't slept either and was running at the same speed the rest of them were running. Rourke gave her Hale's name, the building entry, time the consulting firm, the private monitoring server. Briggs said 4 words, "I'm coming back up," and ended the call. Mia's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number, she answered. "Ms. Chen." The voice was male, measured the voice of someone who had been awake all night and had decided that courtesy was still worth maintaining regardless. "My name is Marcus Hale. I understand you've been told something about me tonight." She said nothing for 1 full second. She registered the number, the timing, the fact that he was calling her directly, and she filed it. "Where are you in this building?" she said. "Somewhere that gives me a clear view of the 12th floor elevator bank," he said. "I want to talk to Senator Harrison." "The senator is recovering from a poisoning," she said. "He's not available for conversations." "The poisoning was not my doing," Hale said. "I want you to understand that very specifically. The compound, the delivery, that was Garrett. I didn't know he was moving to that level. I built the monitoring infrastructure to track information. Not to," he paused, "not to kill anyone. But you watched the information move," Mia said. "You watched the contractor network operate for 2 years and you said nothing." Silence. "Then, it's more complicated than that." "It always is," she said. "Where in the building?" "I need 5 minutes with Harrison. Not to harm him. To give him something." "What's something?" "The piece of the network that Briggs doesn't have yet," Hale said. "The domestic coordination layer. The piece that connects 3 sitting senators to the contractor payments. Harrison has the financial records, but he doesn't have the communications archive. I have it. I've had it for 4 months." Mia stood very still. She looked at Rourke. Rourke was watching her face. She turned slightly away and said quietly into the phone, "Why would you hold it for 4 months?" "Because the 3 senators on that list include a man who has the kind of leverage over my life that makes documentation feel like a very small protection against a very large threat," Hale said. "And because I needed to know who else was building a case before I handed over the one thing that made me useful enough to stay alive." She thought about what that meant. She thought about a man who had spent 4 months sitting on evidence that could end his career and possibly his freedom, holding it like a card he couldn't play until the table was right. She thought about how that kind of calculation hollowed a person out from the slow, corrosive cost of knowing something and not being able to say it. "If I bring you to Briggs," she said, "and the communications archive is what you say it is, your exposure on the monitoring operation is significant." "I know. You built the infrastructure that facilitated a federal cover-up." "I know that too," he said. "I'm not calling to negotiate my position. I'm calling because Harrison almost died tonight, and the people who are still protected by that communications archive are going to try again, and I cannot—" His voice tightened just slightly, just at the edge of composure. "I cannot live with having watched this and said nothing. Not one more day." She turned back to Rourke. She held the phone away from her face for a second and said, "He has a domestic communications archive, senatorial coordination with the contractor network." Rourke's expression sharpened. "That's the missing piece," he said quietly. "That's what Briggs needs to close the financial chain and make the charges stick." She put the phone back to her face. "Stay where you are," she said. "I'm coming to you, not Torres, not Briggs, me, and you're going to hand me the archive, and then we're going to walk together to Agent Briggs, and you're going to tell her everything you just told me." A pause. "Why you?" "Because I'm the only person in this building tonight who doesn't have an existing position in any of this," she said. "I'm a nurse who was in the wrong place at the right time. That's all. And that means you don't have to calculate what I want from this. I don't want anything from this. I just want it finished." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Elevator bank 12th floor north side, service alcove." "Don't move," she said. She ended the call. She looked at Rourke. He was already looking at her with the expression he had when he'd decided something and was waiting to see if she'd decided the same thing. "I'm going with you," he said. "I know," she said. She told Torres on her way past him, quietly and specifically, watching his face confirm that he'd heard her and was adjusting his position accordingly. She did not take the main hallway. She took the service corridor that she knew from 14 months of understanding this building better than most people who worked in it because Mia had always learned the secondary routes first and the primary ones second because secondary routes were where you ended up when things went wrong. The service alcove off the north elevator bank was a small, plain, functional space, a place where equipment waited and nobody lingered. Hale was standing with his back against the wall and his hands visible at his sides, which she registered and appreciated. He was in his mid-40s, the kind of man who looked like his job tailored controlled the practiced neutrality of someone who had spent years managing what powerful people saw when they looked at him. But the neutrality was cracked tonight, and underneath it was something that looked like a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had finally decided to set it down regardless of what it cost him. He looked at Mia. He looked at Rourke. He said he shouldn't be here. He stays, Mia said. He's compromised. He's connected to Harrison's case, and his documentation is already with Briggs, she said. He has nothing left to protect tonight and nothing left to hide. He stays. Hale looked at Rourke for a long moment. Rourke looked back with the particular stillness of a man who had been assessed many times in his life and found it neither threatening nor interesting. Eventually, Hale looked away. He reached into his jacket pocket. Mia's posture adjusted automatically, the old reflex, and Rourke's hand moved slightly at his side. Hale produced a single encrypted drive, small, the kind that could hold 10 years of communications and weigh less than a quarter. He held it out to Mia. She took it. The decryption key is Harrison's daughter's birthday, Hale said. He'll know the format. He gave me that key 2 years ago for a different purpose, and I never told him I'd used it for this. What was the original purpose? Rourke asked. Hale looked at the wall. He gave it to me so I could access his personal calendar remotely. He trusted me with it for something that small. He paused. That's what makes it, that's the part I can't. He stopped again. It was something small, and I used it to protect something enormous and dirty, and I never told him. Mia held the drive. She thought about Harrison in the room down the hall saying, I need to call my wife, and the way his voice had broken on the word right at the end. She thought about what it meant to betray a person who had trusted you with something as ordinary and intimate as a calendar password. You came here to give this to him, she said, not to hurt him. You came here to give it to him in person because you needed him to see your face when you did it. Hale looked at her. His jaw was working. Yes, he said. I understand that, she said, and I'm not going to take that from you. You can tell him yourself. When Briggs clears it. She paused. But first I need to know everything. The 3 senators, the coordination timeline, the domestic network structure. I need to know what's on this drive before I hand it to Briggs so that I understand what kind of protection Harrison needs in the next 48 hours. Hale talked. It took 21 minutes. Rourke stood against the wall and listened and twice pulled out his phone to verify a name or a corporate entity, and each time what he found confirmed what Hale was saying. The picture that assembled itself was large and detailed and ugly in the specific way that institutional corruption was ugly. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the slow, patient capture of process and access and money, the grinding machinery of people who had decided that the rules existed for other people. 3 senators, 11 contractors, $47 million across 6 fiscal years. And the communications archive documented all of it, not summaries, not inference, the actual messages, the actual coordination, the actual decision points, where people had chosen to keep going when they could have stopped. When Hale finished, the alcove was quiet. Then Briggs was there. Mia had texted her the location before she'd left Harrison's room, and Briggs had moved efficiently and without announcing herself, which was the thing Mia had learned to respect about her in the past 3 hours. Briggs looked at Hale. She looked at the drive in Mia's hand. She looked at Mia's face. Is it what we need? Briggs asked. It's everything you need, Mia said, and then some. She handed Briggs the drive. Briggs took it with both hands, which was not a thing she probably did consciously, but which Mia registered as the gesture of a woman who understood what she was holding. Briggs looked at Hale. Marcus Hale, you're being detained for questioning. You have the right to remain silent. She paused. I want you to know that what you've brought tonight will be taken into full account. Hale nodded. He had the look of a man who had expected this and had made his peace with it before he walked into the building, and there was something almost clean about that. the specific dignity of a person who had decided to face the thing they'd done rather than run from it. Briggs took him. One of her team members moved in and they went toward the elevator, and Mia stood in the service alcove with Rourke and felt the shift in the room the way she always felt it when something large and moving finally stopped. Rourke said, "It's done." "The immediate part," she said. "The part that was going to get Harrison killed," he said. "Yes, that part is done." She leaned against the wall, not sliding down it, not collapsing, just allowing herself the small concession of weight transfer, putting some of the night's mass somewhere other than her legs for a moment. "You should sit down," he said. "For real this time. In a minute. You said that 3 hours ago." "I meant it then too," she said. "I just kept not getting to it." He was quiet, then not with the tone of a question, but with the tone of something he'd been holding carefully for the right moment. "The offer Briggs made." She looked at him. "The Joint Medical Intelligence Unit," he said. "You said you'd think about it." "I'm still thinking about it." "What are the variables?" She considered how to answer that. "Whether I can be useful without being consumed," she said finally. "Whether I can do it and still be the person who works the East Wing on Tuesday nights and talks Gerald out of going to water his tomatoes." She paused. "Whether the part of me that spent 6 years doing that kind of work is compatible with the part of me that needed to stop." "Those aren't incompatible things," he said. "You don't know that." "No," he said, "but I know that tonight you did both. You administered the atropine and you protected the senator, and you navigated a federal operation, and you also went back upstairs and checked on your patients and made your chart notations and talked Gerald back into his bed." He looked at her steadily. "You didn't stop being a nurse. You just stopped pretending you were only a nurse." She stood in the service alcove, and she thought about that for a long moment, turning it over with the particular care she gave to things that were accurate and uncomfortable at the same time. "You've been thinking about saying that for a while," she said. "Since the supply room," he admitted, "when you turned around and your hands weren't shaking." "My hands never shake during." "I know," he said. "That's what I've been thinking about." She looked at him, this man who had listened to her hum a Patsy Cline song 4 times, who had built 6 weeks of financial documentation to protect a senator while accidentally receiving her vending machine complaints, who had come to a hospital in the middle of the night because a wrong number had put something in motion, and he was not the kind of man who let things in motion run without him. She looked at him and thought about the particular improbability of all of it, and thought that improbable things in her experience were usually the truest ones. "I'm going back to check on Harrison," she said. "Of course. And then I'm going to sit down. Actually, sit down." "I'll be here," he said. She walked back down the service corridor and pushed through the door to the main hallway and went to Harrison's room. Torres was outside. She went in. Harrison was still on the bed, still upright, still running at the speed his mind ran at when his body couldn't keep up. And he looked at her face when she walked in and read it the way he'd been reading faces for 30 years, in rooms where the truth was usually somewhere between what people said and what they showed. "It's over," he said. "Hale is with Briggs," she said. He brought the communications archive, the domestic coordination layer, the senatorial communications. Everything. She paused. "He came here to give it to you. He wanted you to know that." Harrison was quiet for a long time. Something moved through him that she didn't try to name because it belonged to him and to the 3 years of trust, and the betrayal inside that trust, and the strange, complicated fact that the betrayal had also been carrying its own form of conscience for 4 months without letting it out. She stood and let him have it. "He could have given that to someone dangerous," Harrison said finally. "He's been holding material that could have destroyed the investigation, and he didn't use it that way." "No," she said. "He didn't. That doesn't make it right." "No," she said. "It doesn't." He looked at the ceiling. 14 years ago, I was a county alderman in downstate Illinois," he said. "I had 17 employees and a parking spot that flooded every spring. I thought the biggest moral hazard in public service was losing a vote you believed in." He paused. "I was not prepared for the architecture of this." "Nobody is," she said. "That's how architecture like this survives." He looked at her. "What are you going to do?" "Today, I'm going to finish my shift, check on my patients, write up my incident report before Wright's version becomes the only version on record. And after today, She thought about Briggs in the Joint Medical Intelligence Unit, and Rourke in the service alcove, and Gerald and his tomatoes in the vending machine sandwich, and the Patsy Cline song on a Tuesday night in a car. I'm going to think about what I'm actually good at, she said, and stop apologizing for the scope of it. Harrison looked at her for a long moment. Captain Chen, he said, Senator, for what it's worth, and I understand it may not be worth a great deal coming from a man who almost died in your ER, I think the Army's loss has been considerable. He paused. And I think Chicago's gain has been the kind of thing that doesn't show up in any statistics. She said nothing. She checked his monitor. She adjusted his IV line. She made her notation with the careful precision she applied to all her notations, and she set the chart down and she walked to the door. Get some sleep, she said. Mia, he said. She stopped. Thank you, he said. Not the version he'd said before, medicated and overwhelmed. This version was clear and direct and carried the specific weight of a man who understood exactly what he owed and was choosing to say so plainly. Thank you for not waiting for permission. She held the door. That's the only way it works, she said. She walked out. The hallway was quieter now. Briggs's team had moved their operation to the administrative level. Torres was still outside the door and nodded at her as she passed. Down the hall through the window of the nurse's station, she could see the early gray beginning at the edge of the sky through the high corridor window. Not quite dawn, not quite night. The specific hour that belonged to people who had been awake long enough to earn it. Rourke was at the nurse's station. He had found 2 more terrible vending machine coffees and was sitting in the chair that Patricia usually occupied, and he looked for the first time all night like a man who had allowed himself to be tired. She sat down in the chair beside him. He held out the coffee. She took it. They sat in the quiet for a moment. Briggs called, he said. The 3 senators are being contacted by federal marshals as of 5 a.m. Garrett was found at O'Hare trying to board a connecting flight to Zurich. He's in custody. She nodded. The contractor network is going to take months to fully unwrap, he said. But the immediate threat to Harrison is contained. She nodded again. And the hospital administrator, he said, apparently received a call from the senator's office at 4:15 recommending that all administrative proceedings against a specific nurse be permanently closed. She looked at him. Harrison called Holt at 4:15 in the morning. People with near-death experiences sometimes have a recalibrated sense of urgency, Rourke said. She almost smiled. She felt it, the specific, unwilling tug of a smile at the end of a night that had not had many of those. She let it come. The offer from Briggs, she said. The Joint Medical Intelligence Unit. Yes. I'm going to say yes, she said. On my terms. I keep my floor. I keep my shifts. I keep Gerald and the East Wing and the terrible vending machine. Whatever the unit needs, it fits around that, or it doesn't get me. Rourke looked at her. You've already decided. I'd decided in the service alcove, she said. I was just finishing the sentence. He nodded. He looked at his terrible coffee. For what it's worth, he said, I intend to still be around, if that's not an unwelcome variable. She looked at him sideways. The wrong number. Yes. You said you were waiting for the right moment, she said, for 6 weeks. I was. Was tonight the right moment? He considered it with the genuine seriousness he gave to everything. I think tonight was the moment that made a right moment possible, he said. The actual right moment is probably something considerably less dramatic. Coffee, maybe, somewhere that doesn't smell like antiseptic. I like places that smell like antiseptic, she said. It means everyone is alive. He looked at her. Then somewhere that also smells like an antiseptic, he said. She drank the terrible coffee. The sky through the high corridor window was moving toward gray, now the slow, inevitable arrival of morning over a city that had gone on doing what cities did, while a senator lived, and a network fell, and a nurse stopped pretending to be smaller than she was. Patricia came around the corner at 5:43 with the expression of a woman arriving at the end of a long night and finding it ended differently than she'd expected it to. She looked at Mia. She looked at Rourke. She looked at the 2 terrible coffees and the chart in Mia's hand and the quiet of the hallway. Gerald is awake, she said. He's asking for you specifically. He says the night aide doesn't understand the urgency of the tomatoes. Mia stood. She straightened her scrubs. She picked up her chart. She looked at Rourke. He was watching her with the expression she was learning, the one that wasn't assessment anymore, the one that was something else entirely, something that had been building since a wrong number on a Tuesday night and had arrived somewhere real and solid and worth the time it had taken. "I'll find you after rounds," she said. "I'll be here," he said. She walked down the hallway toward room 412, where Gerald was waiting with his tomato emergency, and behind her the sun came fully over the edge of Chicago and lit the corridor in the pale ordinary gold of a morning that had been earned. And Mia Chen. "Captain." Mia Chen, floor nurse, combat medic, wrong number, reluctant hero, the most qualified person in any building she had ever walked into, did not look back. She already knew exactly what was there, and for the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid of any of it.